In this video, I'm going to be riding this 1973 H2 1004. It's got 120 horsepower and it absolutely flies. But before we go, I need to do a little bit of maintenance and give it a bit of a clean. This H2004 is owned by my friend Neil and it hasn't been used for a year or so, so I thought I'd better give it a bit of a check over before we take it out for a ride. I converted the 3-cylinder engine into a 4-cylinder engine by adding a cylinder on the left hand side. Using my hacksaw, I cut the crankcases in half and then joined 2 sets together to make it into a 4-cylinder engine. Once the cutting process is complete, I file all the surfaces flat and true until they're fit together nicely onto a steel mandrel. The solid steel mandrel is clamped into the main bearing journals, and this ensures it's held in line whilst I weld the crankcases together. The crankcases are then vapour blasted to make sure they're really clean for welding. Nothing is wasted during the conversion. All the bits of leftover crankcases I keep to make 500 twins. An additional centre barrel fits in just perfect. And the 4-cylinder engine fits nicely into the H2 frame, and it's no wider than a Z1000. The H2 triple crankshaft is pressed up out of many parts and can be stripped down and reassembled with extra bits to make a nice 4-cylinder 90-degree crankshaft. The 4 expansion chambers are handmade from stainless steel sheet. Each section is marked out from a cardboard template and then rolled up into a cone and welded. And here you can see the pre-cut sections of stainless steel sheet partially rolled into cones halfway through the process. And here's the welded cone sections waiting to be welded together into expansion chambers. Finally, I polished the exhaust on my vintage buffing machine and they come up with a lovely sheen almost like chrome. The 4 header pipes are standard H2. Under the seat I mounted 3 coils from a Suzuki GT750 and the 4th coil is mounted under the tank. I turn on the ignition and there's nothing. The battery must be completely flat. So I'll go to my shed and get my tools and a new battery and let's fit it onto the bike. I put down a little mat on the floor to protect my knees because sometimes kneeling on stones isn't ideal. The battery is located behind the left-hand side panel. These are easy to remove, and that's why original metal ones are really rare these days, because they used to fall off and you could never find them in the hedge. With the battery strap and fuse holder removed, you can slide the battery out and disconnect the positive and negative wires. The new battery requires a bit of assembly to assemble the brass posts in the correct orientation for your bike. And there's even an Allen key in the bag, so it means you haven't got to go and rummage for one to fit. And that looks just perfect. So now it's all ready to put on the bike. I tighten the battery clamp and replace the fuse into the fuse holder. Then replace the left-hand side cover, making sure the thumb screw's done up tight. I try the ignition again and the neutral light comes on bright and green. The next thing I want to do is lubricate the points, so I remove the points cover using my JIS screwdriver. The points only require a drop of oil, a little bit on the cam and a little bit on each of the pivots just to make sure, and it'll run nicely. I noticed that the left-hand carburetor was leaking at the float chamber joint when the bike's on the side stand, so I'm going to remove this carburetor and sort the problem. I loosened the 4 clamps on the one-piece air filter manifold and slide it back off the carburetors. I then disconnect the fuel pipe and unscrew the throttle slide. I then loosen the clamp holding the carburetor to the engine and remove the choke. The choke unscrews and just pulls out, being careful not to lose the plunger. The carburetor body can now be pulled off the engine by gently twisting to the left. When I made this engine, I fitted Teflon coated pistons, and a quick look down the inlet port, you can see that the Teflon coating is still completely intact, which is really good. With the carburetor removed from the bike, you can really see the extent of the leaking. It's leaking out quite bad and makes my finger wet. I like to remove the float chamber with the carburetor in its upright position. This way I can see if there's any sediment in the float bowl. I look into the float bowl and the petrol looks really clear. I'm really pleased with that, so I tip that away into a container for now, and then I can remove the float. Followed by the cut-off valve and then the gasket. Gaskets can sometimes be stuck into the carburetor body, but this one comes straight out. And here it is. It doesn't look that bad, but I think I'll probably make a new one. The float bowls often get distorted from over-tightening the 4 screws, and basically it pulls the corners down so that the gasket doesn't touch the centre part. So an easy way to rectify this is to first of all remove the brass overflow pipe using my blowtorch. I gently warm the aluminium float bowl, causing it to expand. Then I can use a pair of pliers and gently twist and pull to remove the brass pipe. There we go, that's better. Now give it a quick sprinkle with a garden hose to cool it down, and then we can rub it onto some fine wet and dry paper to see where the high spots are. I use a bit of 1/2 inch thick gauge plate steel, which is flat, as a base. The best grade of wet and dry to use is 320. This is just perfect for the job. Holding the wet and dry paper, I gently rub back and forth with the float bowl to reveal the high spots. You can clearly see in each corner bright shiny metal showing where it's touching, and everywhere else is dull grey showing that it's not touching. This is where the leaks would be. So you continue rubbing and rubbing and rubbing. It can take 5 or 10 minutes, but eventually you'll get down to a completely shiny surface, and then you know you're all good to go. No, that's not quite there. Bit more. And there we go, shiny all the way around, just perfect. The brass overflow pipe looks quite corroded, so I put it in my little battery drill and give it a rub with some steel wool. This brings it up nice and clean and shiny. There we go, that's much better. So now it's ready to put back into the float bowl. And to do this, you line it up with a hole and give it a gentle tap with a small hammer 2 or 3 times, and that'll go straight back in and seal perfect. I now give the carburetor body a quick clean with the carburetor cleaner and leave that to dry in the sun. I look up and the starlings are feeding. They can be quite aggressive and they peck each other. To make a new float bowl gasket, I'm going to use this flexoid gasket paper. It's 0.8 of a millimetre thick and just perfect for the job. I've made quite a lot of gaskets for H2s and H1s over the years, and I made this template from an old float bowl that was corroded through. I cut off the bottom part and then I could just draw around it. It makes it so much easier, and this fits all Kawasaki H1s and Kawasaki H2s. so it has quite a lot of use. I use these punches for punching out the holes. They come in various sizes and are really easy to use. Just one gentle tap and the hole's produced perfectly. Oh, okay, maybe 2 taps. With the gasket marked out and the holes punched, I use my pocket knife scissors to cut it out. And there we go, it's all ready to fit. And the robin has just landed right next to me to watch. He's very tame. I give the floats a quick shake just to make sure there's no patch on them, and they're not. They're totally dry, so that's really good, because sometimes they get little cracks and soak up fuel, then they sink. With the floats reinstalled, I check the height. The float height should be 24mm to the gasket surface of the carburetor body. So I check these with my vernier caliper, like this. It's quite easy to do, and these are just perfect. With the float heights checked, the carburetor can now be reassembled. So first of all, I place on the new gasket, followed by the float bowl and the 4 screws, tightening them evenly with my JIS screwdriver. The smell of carburetor cleaner is briefly interrupted by a nice smell that's coming from the kitchen. So I go and have a look, and Tracy's in there cooking. So I go in to see what it is, and it's our mum's favourite boiled fruitcake mix going in. She puts butter and sugar in the pan, warms it up with glacier cherries and a few nuts, gives it a good stir until it's nice and gloopy. Then she adds a bit of spice and some water, and continues to stir it even further, heating it gently as we go until it boils nicely. Then she adds some flour and some baking powder, a bit of salt, gives it more of a stir through the sieve to make sure there's no lumps. We don't want lumps in the cakes. And even Charlie Weaver's really happy. He had to have more whiskey. And then the whole lot's put into a big baking tray and put in the oven to cook. And hopefully half an hour later, we get some nice fruit cake. With the cake cooling down nicely, I go back out into the garden to refit the carburetor. I find it easier to connect the choke cable first before I actually fit the carb onto the bike. With the carburetor refitted and the screws tightened, I check the chain with my screwdriver, and that seems okay. So then I check the air pressures, and the front one's reading 26 psi, which is a little bit low. I'd rather have 30, so I go back and get my old vintage foot pump and pump it up. That's better. So now I check the rear. 31 psi. It's only dropped 1 psi, so I soon put that back in, replace the valve cap, and now we can do some polishing. There's something quite therapeutic about polishing old bikes. It's something we don't do these days, because most modern bikes are plastic and anodised aluminium. I look across, and the robin's landed in the bird bath. He's having a good old bath. He likes to keep himself clean as well. With the engine polished, I look at the wheels. They look a little bit dull in places, so I brighten them up with the metal polish, and then go to the headers as well to get all the little bits of dead flies off and tar.
Alan!
It's time for afternoon tea and cake, and Tracy's just brought out the freshly baked fruitcake that she made this morning. It's all cooled down now, so we're going to sit and have this, and then we're going to go out for a ride on the H2A. And that was so nice. I think the blackbirds have landed for some crumbs. One of them's looking really scruffy. But I look up, the sky is really blue, so I'm going to go and get my jacket and get ready to go out for a ride. just back from my ride on the H2004. It is so fast, but I had great fun. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe. Well, it's getting late now. Tracy's just come out to feed the hedgehogs. It's about 9:30, and the first one's about to appear. We look across to the fence, and there he is, like clockwork, coming down to get his food. He has a good old nosh, then goes back to his bed. Very strange.